The body was found at dawn, when the first shift of the metro was descending to the trains. Between the rails in the tunnel behind the Izmailovsky station lay something that had once been a man, an experienced machinist, Viktor Semyonovich, who had worked in the metro for 23 years, lost consciousness right in the cab. What he saw in the spotlights did not fit into the framework of an ordinary accident. It was March 1982. Moscow lived in anticipation of spring, buried Brezhnev, and did not suspect that something unimaginable was unfolding under its feet, kilometers of tunnels. The corpse disappeared. He just disappeared before the police arrived. When the task force descended into the tunnel, there was nothing there, no body, no traces of blood on the ballast. Only a strange, sweet smell, which the metro workers could not forget for months. The report said, false call, hallucination of the driver on the basis of overwork. Viktor Semyonovich was sent on vacation and strongly recommended to consult a psychiatrist. But he was not the first and not the last. 8 months earlier, in the hot July of 1981, locksmith Anatoly Kurbatov disappeared. I went down for maintenance in a closed stretch between Barrikadnaya and Krasnopresnenskaya and disappeared. The search lasted 3 days. They searched every meter of the tunnel, every technical niche, every ventilation duct. Only his lantern was found broken in a puddle of some liquid, which was never identified. Anatoly was recorded as a deserter, although he had a wife and 2 children, and he never showed a desire to escape. In the winter of '82, a cleaner at Sportivnaya disappeared. Then, the station attendant at the university. In the spring, 3 more. In the summer, there are 4. All cases had one thing in common. People disappeared at night when the metro was closed to passengers, when only technical teams worked in the tunnels. They all disappeared without a trace, without a scream, without a struggle, as if the earth had opened up and swallowed them. The KGB classified the case in October 1982. By that time, the number of missing was in the dozens. A special group was created under the code name Wormhole. 5 operatives from the 2nd Main Directorate, 3 forensic experts, and a consultant psychiatrist. They were given unlimited powers and strict orders. No publicity, no leaks, no entries in official documents. The group was led by Colonel Igor Rybakov, a man who has seen a lot, from dissidents to maniacs, from spies to serial killers. But even he was not ready for what would open in the bowels of the Moscow metro. The first breakthrough happened by accident. Electrician Pavel Zatov, who was repairing the cable in the office at Revolution Square, heard the sounds. Strange, inhuman sounds coming from somewhere deep in the wall. He put his ear to the concrete and felt cold. There, behind a meter thick, someone was talking. Or rather, he did not speak. He muttered, hummed, made some throaty sounds devoid of human intonation. Zatov did not tell anyone. He was afraid that they would laugh at him or send him to a psychiatrist, like Viktor Semyonovich. But he remembered this place. And when a week later people in civilian clothes with KGB IDs approached him and began to ask strange questions about whether he had noticed anything unusual, he told me. Rybakov personally went down with Zatov to the technical compartment. They listened for half an hour. The sounds were repeated, now fading, now intensifying. It was like speech, but distorted, mutilated, as if someone was trying to speak, forgetting how to put words together. And in between these sounds, there was something else, a gnashing sound like gnashing of teeth on a bone. We got the architectural plans of the metro. It turned out that behind this wall, there was an abandoned tunnel, which began to be built in 1957 as part of a secret government line, but was never completed. According to the documents, he was walled up in 59. The entrance was supposed to be somewhere in the area of the Lenin Library, but it was not on modern maps. The search took 2 weeks. Finally, in an old technical well, behind a rusty door that had not been opened for a quarter of a century, a manhole was found. Narrow, barely shoulder length, going steeply down. From the inside, there was a smell of dampness, mold, and the same sweet smell that the driver Viktor Semyonovich felt. Rybakov ordered to prepare for the operation. A group of 12 people was assembled, experienced operatives, each with combat experience. They were fully armed, machine guns, flashlights, communication equipment. We descended at dawn, when a metro was not yet working. What they found down there became the most guarded secret of the KGB of those years. The tunnel was not as the archival drawings showed. It branched, went to the sides, formed a whole network of passages, some of which were clearly punched after the official closure of the construction. The walls were covered with strange scratches, deep, running in parallel rows, as if they had been left by claws. But the claws were too big for a rat and too human in shape. After 100 meters, the first traces of habitation were found. Dice, lots of bones. They lay in heaps and niches, neatly stacked, gnawed clean. The forensic expert who was leaning over one of the piles turned pale. These are human bones. Fresh. Some are no more than a week old. Then it got worse. In one of the branches, they found a semblance of a camp. Rags, some bedding made of newspapers and cardboard, cans, fragments of bottles. And there are drawings on the wall. They were scratched right in the concrete with something sharp. Primitive, almost childish, but this makes them even more creepy. Human figures. There are a lot of human figures. And above them are other figures, larger, with disproportionately large hands and open mouths. The group moved deeper. The stench increased. A new smell appeared, the smell of decaying flesh. One of the operatives, a young guy, a fresh graduate of the KGB school, vomited it right on the move. He was sent back. The tunnel was widening. They went out into some kind of hall, either an unfinished station or a warehouse. A light was burning here, not electric, but the light of torches stuck in the crevices of the walls. The torches were made of some kind of cloth impregnated with something combustible and smoked, casting trembling shadows. In the center of the hall, there was a pile. At first, Rybakov took her for a pile of rags. Then I realized that these were clothes. Dozens of sets of clothes, neatly folded. Metro uniforms, ordinary civilian clothes, even a children's jacket. And then they saw them. They emerged from the side passages silently, like ghosts. First one, then the second, the third, the 10th. There were 23 of them in total. They moved on all fours, although sometimes they straightened up. They were naked, covered with dirt, and something else, dried blood, excrement mold. Their hair was matted. The nails grew and broke off, turning into claws. But the most terrible of all were the eyes, empty, devoid of reason, animal eyes. They surrounded the group without making a sound. They just stood, swaying, and watched. Rybakov slowly raised his hand, signaling to the others not to shoot. The tension was such that it seemed that the air was about to crack. Then one stepped forward, the largest, with a gray matted beard up to his chest. He stood up to his full height and spoke. Or rather, he tried to speak. Sounds escaped from his mouth, the same ones that electrician Zatov heard through the wall. Throat distorted, but Russian words were guessed in them. Distorted, pronounced by a person who has forgotten how his speech apparatus works. The psychiatrist of the group, a woman of about 40 named Lydia Markovna, then restored this speech from the recordings of the dictaphone for several months. She managed to make out only fragments. Hunger, darkness, you can't go up, they will find out. Punish, we have to eat, to live, at the bottom of the rule, others. One of the operatives could not stand it and twitched, raising the machine gun. It was a signal. The creatures, Rybakov could no longer call them people, roared and rushed forward. They did not run, but rushed on all fours with incredible speed, growling and snapping their teeth. Shots rang out. Automatic bursts echoed through the tunnel. A few creatures fell, but the rest continued to attack. They were fast, unnaturally fast for people who had lived in darkness for who knows how long. One of the operatives screamed. He was knocked down, and he disappeared under a pile of dirty bodies. Rybakov shouted, ordering to retreat. The group backed away to the exit, continuing to shoot. The creatures were chasing them, but strangely, as if they were driving them to the exit, rather than trying to kill them. They scratched, bit, but not fatally. They frightened, drove away, defended their territory. The group broke out into a narrow hole and blocked it from the outside, piling up everything they could find. From inside came screams, grinding blows. Then everything calmed down. The operation was declared a failure. One person was killed, 2 were wounded, and 1 was missing. The one who was knocked down was not found. When they descended a day later with a reinforced group and flamethrowers, the underground camp was empty. The creatures went somewhere deeper, covered their tracks, took everything with them, including the body of their comrade. Interrogations of survivors, analysis of the evidence found, attempts to understand who or what lived in the abandoned tunnels began. There were many versions. The first, fugitive criminals hiding from justice. But why have they changed so much? Why have they lost their human appearance? Second, a secret experiment that got out of control. In the late 50s, the military did conduct tests in the subway related to survival in a nuclear war. But no documents about experiments on humans were found. The third is the victims of some disease, physical or mental. Psychiatrist Lydia Markovna was inclined to mass psychosis, regression of personality under the influence of isolation and stress. But where did these people come from? The answer was found in the archives of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, where the group was given access. Since the end of the 70s, there has been an increase in the number of missing homeless people in Moscow, scourges, alcoholics, people without registration, those whom the system did not notice and did not take into account. There were no official statistics, but some policemen recorded cases. A person slept at the station, in the basement, in the heating main, and in the morning he was gone, as if he fell through the ground. He fell through the ground. Literally. A hypothesis appeared. Someone lured the homeless into the tunnels of the subway. He promised warmth, shelter, food. And there is a trap. They were taken inland into abandoned passages from which there was no return. But who and why? The third descent was organized a month later. This time the group was larger. 30 KGB Special Forces soldiers in full uniform, with lighting generators and maps of all known underground communications in Moscow. The manhole was walled up after the previous raid, but it was broken into, widened, and a passage for equipment was broken. The hall where the first meeting took place was empty. The torches burned out, the clothes disappeared, even the bones were taken out. The group moved on, exploring the branches. Most of them led to dead ends or landslides, but one tunnel, the narrowest and lowest, went down under the level of the operating metro into some ancient catacombs, which were not on any map. It smelled of water and rot. The walls were covered with greenish mold, glowing in the dark with a faint, ghostly light. Slurry squelched under his feet. The ceiling collapsed in places. We had to squeeze through the rubble. And suddenly there was a voice. A human, almost normal voice coming from somewhere in front. Don't go any further. Come back. You can't do it here. You can't. The group froze. Rybakov shouted, "Come out. Hands on your head. We won't do any harm." A man stepped out of the darkness. A real man, dressed, albeit in rags, with a meaningful look. He was extremely thin. His skin was yellowish. His eyes were sunken. He raised his hands, showing that he was unarmed. His name was Grigory Lomov. Once, in 1956, he worked as an engineer on the construction of the metro. Then there was an accident, a collapse on one of the sections of a secret government branch. 18 people were blocked. Rescuers did not come. The construction was classified even more. The collapse was hushed up, and those buried were declared dead. But they did not die. Not immediately. They lived trapped for 3 weeks until they ran out of food. Then something began that no one likes to talk about. First, the weakest died from wounds from diseases. And then the living were faced with a choice to die of hunger or survive. At any cost. The first time was scary. Then it gets easier. Then it ceased to matter at all. When rescuers finally made their way to them, a month after the collapse, only 7 of the 18 remained. And these 7 were no longer who they came. They were not tried. Instead, they offered a choice, either prison and shame for the whole country or disappearance. Official death, a new life in a closed institution. Most agreed. They were sent to a special medical institution in the Moscow region, where psychiatrists tried to return them to normal life. It didn't work out. They fled. 4 out of 7. They escaped and returned to where they felt safe, underground. We made our way to the subway, found abandoned tunnels, settled there. At first, they ate rats, pigeons, which flew through the ventilation shafts. Then the rats ran out, and hunger has not gone away. Then one of them, the craziest one, suggested, "There are many people at the top. They do not notice those who are below. You can take those who are not enough. Homeless, drunkards, fugitives. Nobody needs them anyway." And so the hunt began. At first, cautious, rare, once every few months. Then more often, they developed a system. One went upstairs, looked for a victim, lured down under some pretext. The rest were waiting in ambush. The victim was killed quickly. Grigory swore that quickly, without suffering. Then they were butchered like meat. Part was eaten immediately. The rest was stored for future use. The bones were piled up. Clothes were kept as trophies, as a reminder that they were still people. But they ceased to be people. Every year, there is less and less humanity, more and more animal. The speech was going away. Only instincts remained: hunger, fear, aggression. They ran wild, turned into what Rybakov saw in the underground camp, for became 20. Not all victims died immediately. Some were left alive, at first as a supply of food, but then they broke down, adapted, joined the group. Children of the street, fugitive criminals, lost souls, all of them, having fallen into the tunnels, gradually lost their human appearance and became part of the pack. Grigory was the last one who held on. He did not participate in hunting. He ate the leftovers that were left for him. He tried to preserve his mind, the memory of who he had once been. Therefore, he went out to meet the group, to warn, to stop before it was too late. "There are more of them than you think," he whispered as he was led upstairs. "They are everywhere. under the whole city, not only in the subway, in the catacombs, in old bomb shelters, in sewers, a whole civilization below. And they're hungry, always hungry. He was placed in a psychiatric hospital. He lived for another 3 months. Then he hanged himself on a sheet. In the suicide note, I wrote only one thing: sorry. And the tunnels were cleaned for another 6 months. Special Forces groups combed every abandoned area, every service move, every manhole. They found traces of habitation, found bones, found caches with clothes and belongings of victims. But the inhabitants themselves were rarely caught. They learned to hide, go deeper, dissolve in the labyrinths of the dungeon. There were several skirmishes. One group was driven into a dead end at an old ghost station somewhere between Kievskaya and Smolenskaya. They had to use smoke bombs and dogs. They took 11 people, if you could call them that. They were examined by doctors. Extreme exhaustion, multiple injuries, skin diseases, complete lack of hygiene. Psychiatrists have stated a deep regression of personality, the impossibility of social adaptation. They were placed in a special institution. Closed, guarded. They treated, fed, tried to return to normal life. Unsuccessfully. They could not live upstairs. Bright light caused them pain. Open spaces caused panic attacks. The presence of other people caused aggression. They were rushing back down into the darkness, into their underworld. 3 had to be euthanized for medical reasons, as written in the documents. The rest were kept in isolation for the rest of their lives. The latter died in 97. No one came to his funeral. No one remembered his real name. Operation Wormhole was officially closed in December 1983. The final report read, "The threat has been neutralized. The criminal group was liquidated. The materials of the case are to be destroyed in 50 years." Rybakov resigned immediately after the completion of the operation. They said that he had changed a lot during that year. He turned gray, drooped, became withdrawn. He moved to a small town in the Ryazan region and never went down to the subway again. He died in 2002 from a heart attack. Lydia Markovna, the group's psychiatrist, wrote a secret report on the phenomenon of personality regression in isolation and extreme stress. The report was classified and archived. She herself continued to work, but colleagues noticed that sometimes she froze in the middle of a conversation and listened, as if trying to hear something coming from below. Electrician Pavel Zatov, who was the first to hear the sounds behind the wall, worked in the metro for another 10 years. He never spoke of what he saw or heard, but at home, in the evenings, he often stood at the window and looked at the lights of the city, thinking about what was going on under these lights in the darkness where the light could not penetrate. The Moscow metro continued to work. Millions of passengers went up and down every day, unaware of what had happened in the 80s. Abandoned tunnels were walled up, manholes were concreted, entrances were closed with steel doors with combination locks. But the rumors leaked out. As always, rumors leak out that it's too scary to be true and too detailed to be fiction. Subway workers whispered. Someone heard from someone who heard from someone. Legends appeared about underground cannibals, about monsters in tunnels, about the ghosts of ghost stations. In the 90s, when the archives were opened, journalists tried to find traces of Operation Wormhole. Nothing came of it. All documents disappeared. The witnesses either died or remained silent. Officials denied the existence of any special operation in the subway in the 80s. But old subway workers sometimes, after drinking, tell stories about strange sounds from walled-up tunnels, about traces similar to human ones, which are found in technical rooms where no one has entered for decades. that sometimes in the middle of the night, when the metro is closed and the trains are sleeping in the depot, you can hear a howl coming from somewhere below, from the deepest levels of the subway. And in 2008, during the reconstruction of the Novokuznetskaya station, workers discovered a walled-up passage. Behind it was a small room, not marked on any plan. On the walls there are the same scratches that Rybakov saw. There are bones on the floor, human bones dated by examination to the early 80s. The room was quickly sealed. The passage was walled up again, this time with a triple layer of concrete. A short entry appeared in the documents. The remains of probably victims of an accident during the construction period have been found, handed over to the relevant authorities. No further investigations followed. Moscow lives. The metro is working. Every day, millions of people go down to the subway, go to work, home, on business. They read books, look at their phones, doze off in their seats. They do not think that very close, behind the thin wall of the tunnel, there may be other passages, other spaces, other life. Or what was once life. Officially, the problem has been solved. The threat has been neutralized. The case is closed. But sometimes, in the dead of night, when the last train leaves for the depot and silence reigns in the tunnels, the attendants hear sounds. Distant, barely discernible, but definitely existing. Rustles, scrapes, sometimes something like voices. Distorted, inhuman voices, muttering something in a forgotten language. They don't tell anyone about it. They know that they will not believe it. They know that they will say, fatigue, hallucinations, imagination, as they told Viktor Semyonovich in '82. Therefore, they just do their job, check the rails, inspect the trains, and try not to enter distant technical rooms, especially those marked on the old plans as mothballed or not in operation. They try not to think about the fact that in the kilometers of tunnels near Moscow, there are places where a modern person has never set foot. There are moves that were made half a century ago and forgotten. There are spaces where eternal darkness and eternal silence reign. Or not quite silence, because sometimes in this silence you can hear breathing, the slow, hoarse breath of something alive lurking in the darkness and waiting. Always waiting, patiently, as only those who have learned to live in darkness and have forgotten what light is can wait. The metro is working. People drive. Life goes on. And somewhere below, in abandoned tunnels, in walled-up passages, in catacombs that are not on any map, something continues to exist. Degraded, savage, having lost everything human except hunger. Hunger does not die. Hunger is just waiting. And someday, perhaps, the wall will not be so thick, the castle will not be so secure, and the people at the top will not be so vigilant. Then the history of the '80s can repeat itself. Or it's already repeating itself right now, and we just don't know about it. We don't know yet.